welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno, and I'm delighted to have you join us today. Hey, Transforming Trauma listeners. If you're a licensed mental health professional working with complex trauma and you're interested in learning the neuroaffective relational model, we're excited to share with you that there are 2 upcoming NARM therapist trainings starting in January 2022. One of these trainings will be offered in an online format, and the other will be offered in person in San Francisco, California. This Level 2 NARM therapist training is designed to support mental health professionals who work with clients or populations dealing with complex trauma. Being trained in NARM, one of the first clinical models specifically designed to address ACEs and CPTSD, supports therapists to learn how to address the long-term impacts of adverse childhood experiences and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The NARM therapist training will be taught by NARM senior faculty Brad Kammer and a team of experienced NARM training assistants. You will learn a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach. As you're learning and integrating NARM, you will receive individualized support from this team of skilled, passionate, and supportive trainers. If you're interested in this training, we encourage you to register now to reserve your spot. For more information and to register, please visit www.narmtraining.com/schedule. We look forward to you joining our growing international NARM community and are inspired to work with you to bring NARM to your clients and communities in order to transform trauma. Today's interview is a conversation with 2 of the people in leadership at the Chicago Children's Theater. Founded in 2005, the critically acclaimed Chicago Children's Theater focuses on the production of first-rate children's theater in Chicago, with top writing, performing, and directorial talent and high-quality design and production expertise. Chicago Children's Theater also produces the Red Kite Project, a multi-sensory, interactive theater program tailored specifically to the needs of children on the autism spectrum. In 2017, Chicago Children's Theater became the first theater for young audiences in the nation to win a National Theater Award from the American Theater Wing, creators of the Tony Awards. Jacqueline Russell is co-founder and artistic director of the theater since 2005. In addition to leading CCT's main stage and award-winning new play development, Russell is the creator of the Red Kite Project, a CCT program dedicated to bringing theater into the lives of children with special needs. She spent her early childhood in Beirut and is originally from Houston, Texas. She received her BFA from New York University. She has a daughter, 2 kittens, and a turtle named Leonard. Also, Dexter Ellis is a Louisiana-born educator, director, and actor that misses the crawfish and gumbo, but is humbled by the Chicago theater community. After being with Chicago Children's Theater for 5 years, Dexter now proudly serves as the Director of Education and Community Programs, where he creates a wide variety of programming for ages 0 to 14 throughout Chicago. So please enjoy my conversation with Jacqueline Russell and Dexter Ellis. Hello, Jacqueline. Hello, Dexter. Welcome to Transforming Trauma.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. I love when I get a twofer. It's very fun.
Great.
Yeah, hopefully we can have a little back and forth.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm going to ask each of you individually this question because I imagine your answers will be different. But the way that we start out our podcast here on Transforming Trauma is by asking what you want listeners to get out of the episode today. So, Jacqueline, I will start with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I really feel that what I want listeners to realize and get out of this is just how much the arts can do in terms of healing and helping, especially young people with trauma. And I think that especially theater is really just a perfect avenue into this work.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dexter?
Yeah, so I also gave this question a lot of thought, and I think what I would love for listeners to get out of it is really very similar to what I wanted out of the NARM training that Jacqueline and I did in the spring, which was for educators to think about practical applications of bringing trauma-informed practices into the classroom and just begin that thought process.
Wonderful. Well, why don't we jump in and have y'all tell us about the Chicago Children's Theater? So my hometown, woohoo! Jacqueline, do you want to share since you've been with the company for quite some time?
Sure. So I founded the company about 17 years ago. I am also the artistic director, and it was really founded here in Chicago, where I think is just one of the greatest theater towns in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it was founded with an incredible community here of theater makers. And the goal was to create the best quality theater for young people we can. And that oftentimes children's theater is considered sort of lesser than and can be pretty dumbed down. I always thought of it as like animals in sweatpants or something with tails. And that was just so depressing to me, especially my daughter was very young at that time. And I wanted really serious, significant theater for her to experience with great artists making it and performing it. So people you'd see at Steppenwolf or Goodman or Looking Glass. And so we set out to do that 17 years ago. And in the meantime, we were offering classes and teaching at camps and doing things around the city where we could to work with children making theater. And I particularly was doing a lot of work with children on the autism spectrum and doing a lot of work in Chicago public schools. And eventually we created an entire sort of wing of our company called the Red Kite Project, which is dedicated to creating art with and for children on the autism spectrum. And so that has really, I think, it's really catapulted us to a national level, internationally, as well as a lot of the new work that we've created that really speaks to children today. A lot of contemporary stories about trauma, about bullying, and about empowerment ultimately for children. So that's just a little bit about our theater.
Wonderful. Dexter, what's your role in the company?
Yeah, I'm the director of education and community programs. And, my job is mainly focused on building curriculum and bringing it into classrooms across Chicago, as well as having our own classes and camps that they're building.
Well, and I mean, you both have extensive theater backgrounds, and I guess I'm curious, because if this is a passion of yours to bring trauma-informed education to the classroom, to the theater world, what were you seeing or not seeing, I guess, that kind of made you think, oh, this is something that we need to be doing?
Again, another question that I've given a lot of thought to because, we encounter children, we encounter parents, we encounter educators, other artists. So our world is pretty big, goes beyond children. And so I think that one of the things that is really important in the trauma work is about healing ourselves, about self-reflection when we're working with children. I think that's really important and powerful. And to start with ourselves before we even start to address what is going on with young people, I think is a really important place to start. And so wanting to bring that to our practice was very important to me. Also working with so many children with autism in particular, there's a lot of trauma in those family circles and wanting to create a space where those families can come and feel loved and accepted and to really get what they're not really able to find in so many other places in our society. So I think that theater is really a place where people can come and find self-expression and empathy. I just feel like it's a healing art, honestly. And so I think it's a place to heal as well.
Wonderful. Dexter?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been with the company for 5 years now and really, really helped build the department alongside many wonderful teaching artists and humans. And when we started going into classrooms, I felt like we were looking at, walking into situations that were very, very different across the city, depending on where you are.
Yeah. Are you going into schools all over Chicagoland?
Yeah. So we're going, everywhere from the very north of the city to all the way south and out west and everywhere in between. So, and a lot of the situations, a lot of the things that we're seeing in classrooms, like I said, were very different. And, we were identifying this thing as trauma, a lot of complex trauma happening within these children's lives. And we wanted to find a way to, make a difference for those kids and create safe spaces that ultimately every child deserves to have.
Yeah. And listeners might not know the Chicago public school system, and Chicago in and of itself is extraordinarily segregated. And so there's a very wide gap and disparity in different neighborhoods and different schools. Even though it's one giant school system, the learning I hear is very, very different.
Oh, absolutely. And the resources, even in the public schools, vary by what neighborhood you're in, which is, a tragedy and in of itself, just because it doesn't matter where you live in the city. They're all funded by the same area. And you think that they would have those equal resources, and they simply don't.
Right. And there are many kids. I worked in a high school when I first started in my career at Sen High School, which you may be familiar with.
Right around the corner from me. Yeah.
Yeah. Up north. And I couldn't believe so many of the students that I worked with that traveled an hour and a half to get to school every day. So regardless of what trauma they're already experiencing, just the trauma of that commute, like I would wish that on no one, let alone a child.
Absolutely. It's so messed up the way that the system is set up too. Jackie and I were talking about this last night, actually. The way the lottery system, the way that they put kids into schools is just not equitable.
Do you want to share a little bit about that, just so listeners know what we're talking about?
Yeah, Jackie might know a little bit more than me about that.
Yeah, I mean, there are all different schools within Chicago public schools, and some of them are neighborhood schools, and some of them have what are called gifted programs. Some of them are magnet schools. So there are lotteries, there are people applying for these. And of course, it's really the most savvy of parents who can make that happen for their kids. And even those people can't always get their kid into a public school that is accessible and safe and on a good track. And then when we go to high school in Chicago, the kids have to test into their high schools. And it is so stressful and so competitive. And my daughter ended up in one of those schools, Whitney Young, which is actually not far from the theater on the Southwest side. And it was really super sad to see the children in her elementary school who didn't place into these schools, who were just somewhat left behind. And there was definitely an economic and racial divide that was really apparent. And it's a difficult system. And I can tell you that she was very traumatized by it on so many levels, and felt like, she was burnt out by the time she got to college. It's not the high school that I grew up in like a little suburb in Texas where, it was like across the street. It doesn't happen like that in Chicago. So it's a tough system. And, we're really fortunate because we have so many funders in this city, though, that are really dedicated to Chicago public schools that pay for this work that we do. And put us into all of these different neighborhoods with these children all over the city. And so it's a huge priority for us. And we know that these schools and these children are hungry for anything they can get a hold of. And so, wherever we can, that's where we put our resources.
That's so wonderful. And I love that we're having this conversation about education, because just thinking back on the other interviews that I've done, we've talked about higher education a little bit. We've talked about the medical system, healthcare system, but I don't know that we've really dug into educational trauma. And it's profound for so many people. Everyone has a story about some sort of either shaming experience or trauma that happened in school. So I love that we're having this convo.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell us how you discovered NARM.
So my daughter, Cherie, that I just mentioned, is actually going to the University of Chicago to get her degree in social work and wants to become a licensed therapist, and is particularly passionate about this work in the field of trauma. And we at Chicago Children's Theater were already working with the Lurie Children's Center for Childhood Resilience to create a trauma-informed curriculum, which we're now putting in the public schools in kindergarten and first grade, especially as kids are transitioning back from COVID. And so I'm really excited for Dexter to share more about that with you. But we were doing this work with these phenomenal psychologists and social workers and just amazing people at the Lurie Children's Center. And my daughter said, you really ought to look into NARM. This is really a way of deepening these conversations and what you're learning. So I shared the information with Dexter. I was like, let's do this. Let's do this as a company. It's a big commitment, honestly, to do the training. And I was so happy that Dexter was like, yes, let's do this. I mean, it was really profound, and it definitely has impacted our work. And it's impacted us personally and professionally. And what I want to see and I know is happening is it's going to impact all of the children that we're working with too.
Mm-hmm. I think the thread that might be really cool is, Dexter, if you tell us about the curriculum, and then you can tell us specifically, what you got from NARM that you've been able to bring to this work.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started developing these residencies with Flurry, the curriculum for it, about a year and a half ago. It was right before the pandemic actually happened, which insane timing there. Because we had noticed that there was a lot of resources, or I shouldn't say a lot, but there are more resources as you get older, in high school for people that are experiencing trauma, but it's not really talked about necessarily for younger people. And being Chicago Children's Theater, and like Jackie has alluded to, the theater is such a great way to embody a lot of these, or through embodied activities, explore a lot of these things. So we decided to create this curriculum with Flurry, and it's, it's all based around a book, Matt de la Peña's Love. And it really focuses on giving kids the tools to be resilient. So our resilience residencies, or we call them ROAR residencies, are meant to provide safe spaces for children and really help them have agency in situations, especially situations where they may not necessarily be given agency. And we do this through helping them identify emotions within themselves and within other people, but primarily themselves, and just what it feels like to feel certain emotions in their body, and what they can do when they feel certain emotions.
So important.
Yeah, absolutely. Even as adults, it's super important.
Oh, I have so many clients who can't locate their emotions.
Right.
And I only work with adults.
Yeah. Yeah. And whenever we started NARM, this was such a question that gets asked all the time is, how are you feeling right now? And where do you feel it in your body? And how does it feel to identify that? And so insane. When we first started NARM, I told Jack, I was like, I might be in over my head here. There's not a ton of educators here. But after the first couple of days, I was like, this is incredible. I'm getting so much out of this that it's a lot of the same work that we're already doing. But also, like Jackie said, it was a lot of personal things that were happening for me that I think definitely will affect the work moving forward.
Do you mind sharing how you were personally impacted?
Jackie and I had talked about this almost every session. Whenever I have conversations with people now, I'm not trying to drive the conversation in the way that I want it to be driven. Whenever I work with kids, whenever I work with coworkers, even in my personal relationships now, the NARM is all about, asking questions.
Curious.
And staying curious. And I have found that you can stay curious in conversations with people and not prescribe emotions to people or make assumptions about how people are feeling. And that seems like such a simple idea, but it makes things so much easier and authentic.
Well, and how often are we? I mean, we're taught to try to assume, I think, generally, I think a lot of people may think, I should know how you feel so that I know what to do for you. But NARM says, wait a minute, let's step back and be curious about what someone's feeling and be curious about what comes next. We don't know. Just because somebody's sad, that doesn't mean they want comfort, right?
Yeah, and it's not our job to solve every single problem.
I'm really curious how you've seen that shown up. That's kind of a deepening NARM question, right? So how have you noticed this knowing for you that you don't have to assume emotions? How has that impacted your interactions? Yeah,
absolutely. So I find that I ask more questions now when talking to people. I find that, for me personally, I'm married and my wife's a teacher, and, you come home and there's always, no matter what job you have, you come home and there's this that happened to work today, there's that happened to work today. And I feel like before, not even realizing it, I would be like, well, you should do this, and let's go do something to be happy now, to get your mind off of it. And that's not an appropriate response. And it wasn't helpful. And clearly it wasn't helping, but that didn't stop me from keeping on doing it. And then going through these trainings, I was like, oh, wow, I wonder what it would be like to step back and just ask questions. It's little things like that happen. That's a specific one, but that was one that I noticed immediately as I live with her.
Well, and I wonder, has your wife shared her noticing that you might be showing up differently?
Oh, I think so. She definitely has. At first, she was like, "Oh, I know you're doing this because of the training that you've been doing over the weekends."
She's like, "I got your number.
Yeah.
I see what you're doing." Oh, wow.
But I think, after, you have to catch yourself at first slipping into old, not so helpful habits. And, now it feels a lot more natural. And that doesn't mean I do these things all the time or do the right things all the time, but it's a journey. And I, try to be curious when I can.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jacqueline, I guess I'd love to know how it's impacted you personally as well.
Yeah, I would say also like Dexter, coming from a background where a lot of my strategy has been to fix things. I'm a fixer. And it was really nice. I think it was really like the very first session. It was like, we do not need to be fixers. And to give myself permission to stop trying to fix things was really incredibly freeing, but also very difficult because it is a habit. And so really trying to stop being the fixer and also really looking at that, what NARM talks about, the 50-50 of being working to be 50% inside yourself and 50% like really, relating and connecting and, constantly trying to find that balance and questioning sometimes when I'm in a situation that might really start to trigger or stress me to try to figure out, where am I? Am I staying in here and remaining curious, but like remaining within myself? And then, like Dexter too, like I think especially as I'm trying to help, whether it's an employee on a project, an artist, just asking people more like, what is it that you need from me? What would be helpful to you? And I think that, this is really, again, where NARM talks about like creating those intentions, with your client. So we're not really working with clients in quite the same way, but we're interacting with people like Dexter says all day long in our lives, personally and professionally, and to say, what is it you're looking for? I think especially artists can bring something to us. And I think it's just such a great place to say, what is it you're looking for? What do you need? What type of feedback are you in need of? And immediately the trust and the connection becomes so much stronger. And so that has just, I think, impacted me in just a super helpful and very concrete way.
Well, what comes up for me now is, as Dexter talked about children not necessarily having agency, how absolutely agency filled it is to ask a child, what is it that you want? Because how often do children get asked that question authentically, right?
Absolutely.
It's so true. And it's incredible the amount of times that, that I asked that to children over this past summer, how often that was met with total silence and then thoughtfulness and then them trying to articulate that.
What are some things that you would hear as a response to that question?
It's always something so simple, right? It's always something so simple like, oh, I wanted to play with them, or, oh, I needed them to look at me and hear what I was saying. I mean, mostly that's what it's about, right? Is being heard or working together, collaborating in some way. And it's interesting to see how changing that could be for them to articulate that and reflect on that. And I would say that's one of the biggest things that we changed this summer whenever so we have camps all summer long. So we have students in the building every day, and most of the weeks, we're creating original shows with the kids. So, we're tackling some big ideas or themes and then creating characters with the kids and then putting on the shows, which is inherently a pretty trauma responsive thing. And a lot of the time, with any large group of kids, there's going to be rules, agreements, some discipline stuff in there. And that's always been kind of my least favorite part of what I do. And I think it's just because we hadn't nailed down a system that was fruitful for the kids that serve the children. And so after going through this NARM training, we really took a look at that. Like, how do we talk about rules with the kids? How do we enforce those rules with the kids? And it's not about, enforcing the rules. It's about giving children the choice and creating agreements with them. It's something, a pretty simple tool that a lot of teachers use in their classroom, which is creating community agreements, whenever you start a program, and then tools of reflection along the way if those agreements are broken. So even that verbiage itself is so powerful for kids because if students broke the agreements this past summer, they were either asked to do a verbal reflection or a written reflection where they were asked, why are you here, first of all? And what were you trying to get in that moment? How are you trying to get what you get in that moment? How did it make you feel? How did it make other people feel? I
just got chills. What if every child got that opportunity? How our world would change.
Yeah, absolutely. What if every person reflected like that after, something happened? Yeah.
I'm just like thinking of a world that's transformed because all children get taught this.
Right.
Agreed. Totally agree. I was so excited, when Dexter really took on reflection as a big part of his intentions for improving our summer campers' experience, and as well as our experiences as, adults working with kids. And so, I think we talked a lot about the idea of protest in behavior, and that a lot of times when children are acting up or, whatever, you want to call it, that it's a form of protest, And I think that sometimes kids just get stuck in these patterns, and the fact that we just want to just immediately change the behavior and not really help them come to some sort of recognition, and then also validation from those of us outside of them, is just so profound. And I think all three of us can say that we didn't get that,
Right.
And so being able to offer that, and I just thought these reflections were so beautiful. And I think Dexter can tell you that it also really cut down on that time of disciplining. It cut down on that. And I was just thinking about another example of something I wanted to share, which I thought was also just a really wonderful way to give a child agency. My daughter was coming over to babysit a younger child of a friend of mine. And of course, when my daughter showed up to babysit the little one, she didn't want a babysitter, right? So she was mad at mom. She wrapped herself up in the curtains in the front of the house and wouldn't come out.
Okay.
And so just an incredible, fit. And so my daughter walked over to her and said, I can see that you're upset right now. And the little girl inside the curtain said, yes. And Cherie said, well, how long do you think you're going to need to feel this way? And the little girl, it took her she was like 4 years old. She was like, 10 seconds. And so Cherie counted to 10 with her. And then she came out of the curtains and was ready to go. And I was so blown away by that moment, because I thought, here you can even give a 4-year-old the opportunity to make a choice, instead of, trying to prod them or say, come out now, or, that it was so beautiful that, when you asked her, how long do you need to do this? It was not a very long time at all, And
how quickly an adult might come in and assume that, she wants to throw a fit for a long period of time. And what's really coming up for me right now is our culture's obsession with like efficiency and productivity and doing things on a schedule. And I'm not a parent myself, but I hear from my clients who are parents, the frustration often comes when they have to be somewhere and the kid isn't doing the thing. And that's where punishment often will come in very quickly, and the knee-jerk reactions instead of these reflections. But that's such a beautiful example of literally it took 10 seconds to get back online.
Exactly. And I think that, again, this is what I liked about NARM. And I think what Dexter was adding about his relationship with his wife was like, sometimes most of us, we don't want to be told how we're feeling or what to do. And I loved in the training when we got to experience that in some of our small groups, where it was like, try to just reflect back what someone is saying to you. Try not to edit, interpret. Very challenging. And really, someone would say, I felt so much better when I got to hear my words,
right?
And not somebody else's words. Just blew my mind.
It's really fun being on the training team. And I remember talking about that specific exercise and how we would watch people having difficulty literally just saying the same words, thinking that there's some sort of trick, there's something else I'm supposed to be doing, right? All of the baggage that we put on the way we assume we're supposed to show up rather than just being present.
Exactly. And children are just the same.
Mm-hmm.
They are just the same. And so for me throughout that entire time, and sometimes Dexter and I would be like, I'm just trying to figure out how this relates to what we do. How does this relate to really young children? And it does relate to really young children. And it's our lens that we work through, but it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
They are people with agency and a need to be heard and respected.
Mm-hmm.
And listened to, for sure, like genuinely, curiously listened to.
And this is also making me think about, you hear when we talk about resilience that when a child doesn't have the support in the environment at home, that children who develop resiliency and who bounce back from adversity always had someone who heard them, listened to them, saw them, and you are providing that for these children. That's just so incredible. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's not even that, of course, people always have somebody, or most of the time have somebody. And, sometimes we are the people in that classroom, but our goal is, even when we're not there, even when we're not present, is to help them identify people in their lives that can be that person. It's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to feel scared. It's okay to, be anxious about things. It's about, what do we do whenever we encounter those? And it's, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just about thinking about it with the kids and talking with them and figuring out, like, what are some tangible things that we can do when we feel these things? Because it happens through adulthood. It's not going away,
I'm just blown away. This is just so beautiful. I love that this is happening.
We do too.
Yeah.
Oh.
We would really love for every child to get to experience this type of work. And I mean, just what that means for them. It means a lot for the educators too. I think what Dexter was saying earlier was like really wanting to see this kind of work in all classrooms. My hope is that more educators get this kind of training, because again, they're experiencing a lot of stress in these very stressed out systems. And so how can they be their best if they're not getting taken care of? And so self-care is a big part of our resiliency work too. And if we can help those educators, I think that they're going to be better equipped than, for the children that they're working with. And so it's really, again, I feel like it's something that artists are just particularly equipped to do. I've always felt that theater artists are the best equipped, because basically expression is, part of our trade, right?
That's
it's
the job.
It's the job. It's just, it's expression. Storytelling is a big part of that. And so I've always found that, like no other art form, I think that theater can really get to these places really quickly.
Well, when I think about what makes a good actor, I think that a good actor probably needs to know themselves inside and out. And so I hear you talking about really supporting these children and learning how to know themselves.
Yes.
Because you can't be someone else unless you know yourself, right?
That's right. And again, how much curiosity does it take to be somebody else too? And so many people, I think, a lot of times when they think about theater, they think about, very egotistical people who, want to be on stage and get applause, and,
which there are those.
And there are those, and there's nothing wrong with being on stage and getting applause. Yes, we definitely have kids who want to be theater makers, but the work of, really drama in a classroom goes way beyond wanting to put on a show. Putting on a show is a great experience for any child, because it does build confidence and it does build communication skills. And as Dexter was saying earlier, it's a collaborative art form. So it's a great way to teach children to listen to each other and work together. But at the same time, a lot of these things are really about tuning into the self. We talk about, as a performer, your tools are your voice, your body, and your imagination. So think about all of that, knowing about your body. And as you were saying before, just that disconnect that so many people experience physically, when we start to really teach children at a very early age to start finding where things are being felt in their body, is something that is a useful tool. You do not need to be an actor to benefit from this education.
Dexter, do you have something to add?
Yeah, no, just what Jackie said. Those skills that we learn in theater, we take with us no matter where we go, and just to be good humans in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some of the kids we train will become, famous actors on Broadway and in LA, and maybe they won't. Maybe they'll be, the most empathetic human being in the world.
Right. And that's a big win.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd love to hear some content of these plays that you're creating with the students, since you're really digging into some heavy material, as you said. What are y'all coming up with?
Oh, yeah. So our shows are, throughout the summer are really driven by whatever team is working on that specific one. So we have a director, a music director, and then a designer that works with the kids. So they rotate through those three areas. And I think some of my favorite ones do tackle the larger ideas. And some of the ones that stand out to me are shows that are more process focused, like Jackie has talked about, as opposed to product focused. So it's not about stand here and say the sing and sing the sing. It's about thinking about characters, about somebody that's different from ourselves, and what makes that person, or whatever they are, if they're not a person. The biggest one that has stuck out to me over the past couple of years, just because of the conversations that surrounded it, where we did this show that was called Comics and Capes. And the idea for the show was that it was a living comic book. And the character was totally unintentional, but the kids had all created their comic book characters. And the struggle that they had come up with was with the writer. And so those were the two opposing forces in this.
Oh, so the characters versus the writer?
Yeah. So it was, it was a writer. And this writer, and it wasn't necessarily even versus, but that's where the struggle was. But the writer ended up becoming this godlike figure. And so there was a lot of talk of spirituality and what that looks like in different cultures and what that is for different people. And these are 6 and 7-year-olds having this conversation at lunch and asking for input from the teachers that are walking around, you know? And those are the kind of insane conversations that I feel like I was never given the opportunity to have when I was young. And here we are doing it with the kids. So,
Dexter, can you share a little bit about the work we've done with the children in Mumbai and our collaboration with them? Because their work was profound too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been working with a company in Mumbai, the Pomegranate Workshop. And so there are these Saturday morning classes. And we've done a couple different modules now. The first one was about mythology and what mythology looks like in different cultures, and then creating a shared myth between the US and India. And then the second one looked at climate change and the UN's sustainable goals, which is a little bit out there and different. But it, again, is about giving kids agency in a world that doesn't normally give them agency, their future.
They are going to be shaping our future, right?
Exactly.
I just think about, kids today are talking about climate change and social justice. And I was worried, like, if a boy liked me or not, So it's just incredible what the generations behind us are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just want to give them a space to talk about that because, it's their world.
Wonderful. Any other show that really sticks out for you?
I guess, thinking about some of the work that we're doing right now, we're actually creating a piece called Disability, which it's a filmed production because we're still somewhere between virtual and live performance. And during COVID, we started commissioning artists to come up with pieces that they thought it was really time for children to experience and to see on our stage at Chicago Children's Theater. And this piece was created by Nabi, Kelly, and Daniel Carlton. And we're working with 3 young people with disabilities who, in the course of the story, are transformed or realize that they are superheroes. So one of the young actors we're working with is blind, another one is deaf, and another one has autism. And this piece follows each one of them as they are working to help rescue a missing famous cat in Chicago. And so it has this wonderful, really sweet story to it. But underneath it is just this really powerful story of strength and of finding your own value and your superpower. And their superpowers are so beautiful. They are about love and connection and about caring for others. And so it's just a really beautiful piece. And one of the young actresses who is deaf, she's voicing her own lines, which is just so beautiful to hear her voice and the courage that she's exhibiting, and how much we talk in every one of our rehearsals about love and about kindness and acceptance. And so I think, again, there was so much in NARM about heartfulness, and it was kind of like where we really sort of ended up. And we just talk all the time now as we're creating work for children and with children about how important it is that the work is heartful, and that ultimately, like Dexter said, the book that we have based this ROAR program on is called Love by Matt De La Pena. And it's really important to feel love and to love. And how many people have lost that connection, have broken hearts, and how do we help put that back together? And so there's just so much there about that. And so it's amazing that I can't believe sometimes that this is work, this is a job, and how much time we spend talking about love and courage and connection. So I'm really excited about this piece, and all these young people are working so hard right now in rehearsal, and it will all come together being filmed next month. And we'll be sharing it, with the world. We want everybody to see how amazing these young people are.
Well, I'll look forward to checking that out. And as you were talking, I'm so glad that you pulled the thread of love through, because as we've been talking about agency, obviously that's incredibly important, but sometimes we mistake agency and empowerment and self-esteem, right? The self-esteem movement, we've largely realized, was hooey and didn't really do what we thought it was going to do. So you're not offering self-esteem. I really hear this interconnectedness that you're fostering, that you're supporting the children to foster this understanding that not only do I matter in this world, but how I impact others matters.
Yes. And how you impact the world, right? And this does sometimes feel like a time of hopelessness. I think, if anything, working with young people, I've seen more hopelessness than I can recall in times past. And so I think the only way to address that is through love.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a good question to end on. What gives you both hope?
What gives me hope is whenever we give children the opportunity to reflect in ways that may not have gotten to reflect on, and the fact that they're able to do it from such a young age as well. To me, that's so exciting. And the idea too, that it's not terribly difficult to ask those questions either, to ourselves and to others. I was, like I said, I felt like maybe it was in over my head whenever we started the NARM training, and soon realized that, these are things that everybody can do. And so it gives me hope to see children being able to do this. And like you said, hopefully this sort of work happens enough, and, we create this next generation of people that are able to have the emotional intelligence to identify those things within themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah. Everything Dexter said and more. I think I feel so much hope when I'm with children, because, when you do pose questions to them, they already have such a good moral compass. They already, they're so concerned with fairness and naturally concerned with being kind. It's interesting that it almost seems like it's the negativity and the meanness, I really believe, that is taught. And I think that their natural inclinations and the way that they come into the world is so full of love and wanting to be loved and to give love and to be, keepers of others and themselves. And like every time we do a play with kids and, we ask them about their opinions or we show them something, they immediately know. They know things. So it always restores my faith. I think that all of the movements of the recent year and a half or so for social justice gives me a lot of hope. I think the battle is many and hard, but there is so much there that is really, I believe, is going to make change. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you so much. I'm just really immensely touched by the work that you're doing. And it sounds like you really have found a way to translate NARM to your work in such a beautiful, wholehearted way. So thank you. And congratulations too.
Thank you. Thank you. We, again, we kind of went into it like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And then we were just so thrilled that we were able to take this and again, translate and put it through our lens. And so thank you. And we're really honored to get to share our experiences with you and with your listeners. Again, we hope that we just inspire other people that are working with children or have children in their lives to just take this with them too and follow these threads wherever they may go.
Well, for folks who would like to know more about the theater or support you, where can they find you?
ChicagoChildren'sTheater.org.
And is that theater ER or theater RE?
We are theater RE.
RE, yes, the theater then.
The theater.
The fancy spelling.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for all the work you're doing. I'm certain that there will be listeners out there that are very inspired by what you're bringing.
Well, thank you. We hope that people will reach out to us. And we'd love to continue this conversation and support other people's work in this area too.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's really fun to spend this time with you. What an honor.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest, check the show notes or visit us at www.narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. The NARM Training Institute also offers the Inner Circle, an online self-paced learning program intended for anyone who is interested in joining an international online community focused on healing complex trauma. You can find more information about these trauma-informed learning programs in addition to other resources on the website, www.narmtraining.com. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.